order. General Manager, do you have any housekeeping announcements before we start?
Yes, thank you, Madam President, and good evening, everybody. Firstly, can everybody hear me? Great. My name is Robert Shaver, and I serve as the General Manager for the Alameda County Water District. Conducting virtual board meetings and workshops is still a relatively new experience for us, but we are getting better at it. So please bear with us if we have any technical issues this afternoon. Members of the public may participate in this public meeting either via Zoom or by telephone. If you're using Zoom, generally we ask that all participants mute their microphones unless speaking. You may also be placed on mute by the district secretary. The district will unmute participants at the appropriate time when the board is receiving public comments. In Zoom, you'll be able to view your presentation materials as they are presented to the board. At any time, you may submit a question or raise your hand in Zoom if you are muted and you would like to address the board. If you're using telephone audio, again, we ask that you mute your phone. Please refrain from making comments unless prompted by the district secretary. And if you use both Zoom and the phone at the same time, be aware that there can be echo and feedback issues. Presentation slides are available on the district's website. That's www.acwd.org. If you have access to the website, you may download the slides and follow along with your phone that way. And you may press *6 to get the attention of the district secretary. This Zoom webinar will be recorded and will be made accessible to the public for future viewing. And we will have a closed session this evening, but we're hoping to get to the main agenda at about 4 p.m. So after taking public comments, the board will convene in closed session. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. Ms. Marcoux, roll call, please.
Director Zakwari.
Present.
Gunther.
Present.
Sethi.
Director Sethi, you're on mute.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Here.
Director Weed.
Here.
And President Juan.
Here. Director Gunther, would you lead us in a salute to the flag, please?
Certainly. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Director Gunther. Let's see. Next is public comment on matters on this notice of special board meeting. Do I have any members of the public that wish to address the board at this point? If you wish to address the board, please raise your hand or speak up. I am not seeing anybody.
Madam President, Ms. Morgan has raised her hand, literally.
Yes, Ms. Morgan.
Hi, so can I just make comments about the N3 cattle ranch? I know it's on the agenda, but I don't know if I can do that. Is that correct? No?
Pat, you're on mute, but I will say that is.
Yes, she can comment on N3.
Okay. All right. Should I start?
Yes, please, Ms. Morgan. Thank you.
Okay. So I just want to add my 2 cents again on the purchase of this property. Some research I did this morning. I'm sure you're aware that the city of San Jose has purchased the last bit of Coyote Valley. I think the report said $93 million. Some of Trust for Public Lands participated in the purchase of that. And I think it's a good thing. But what we're seeing and hearing from ACWD is not much about the N3 cattle ranch. I don't hear any contributions from other public trusts. I did read this morning about an Altamont landfill open space. Now, the word landfill scares me. I don't know if that's going to be a garbage dump, where that would be in Livermore. Nature Conservancy has contributed some money, Trust for Public Lands. And then I read, now I'm not sure if this was a 2020 report, that California wants to contribute 5 million to the purchase. And I understand the purchase price has gone down, but I'm going to be mighty upset. And all the friends that I talked to about this, many of them are not even aware of this purchase or the proposed purchase of this property. I don't see how you can just deny talking about it just because you're in negotiations. Now you have a closed session again today for that discussion. I can understand the financial stuff, but you need to start telling the public that this is a possibility. San Jose did it. San Jose bought the rest of Coyote Valley. Why can't ACWD do that? We need to get more nature conservancy involved, Sierra Club involved. I mean, the thought of Altamont landfill open space, I don't think that's a good idea. We're not going to give it to them, are we? No matter what they pay for. And I understand the price has gone down. I just want my 2 cents to somewhere to listen to that. That if my friends find out you're using their increased meter cost to buy a piece of property, is really terrible. Anyway, that's my 2 cents again.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Do I have any other members of the public that wish to address the board on matter that's on this agenda? Please speak up or raise your hand. And Ms. Marcoux, help me watch out. Look for raised hand. I am still not very good at toggling.
President Wong, this is Paul Sethi.
Director Sethi?
I wonder, so that there's no confusion in the public, if we could clarify what the possible participation of Altamont might be here. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, even from other people I've talked to. Maybe we
hold on.
legal counsel to provide that clarification, or general manager, but I don't think people should be left with the impression that there's a dump going up on the N3 cattle ranch.
So Pat, how far can we go in this clarification?
So what we've been doing is really talking about in closed session, price in terms of payment. If there's a clarification that was made, and because we have had a few open sessions, it's been a while since we've done that. Anything that's in the public domain would be okay to clarify. Just be careful not to disclose anything that we've been talking about in closed session.
So how about let's put it this way, Ms. Morgan, we're not going to talk about the participation of Altamont Open Space Trust. I think that's their name, but it's actually not a landfill. It's a trust of funds that's set up as condition for them to build a landfill. The landfill is already existing. It's just as part of condition for, I think, the expansion of the landfill, a set amount of money was set aside with a condition that the money should be used for open space preservation. So if they participate, or if they choose to participate in the purchase of N3, it'll be money that's especially set aside by the landfill company for open space preserve. It's not associated with building a new landfill.
They're not going to get more land to build more landfill. Is that what I'm understanding, Judy?
I am going to put it as,
Oh.
if they choose to participate, that money can only be used for open space. Or
Okay.
that's, I think that's a factual correction that I can get to.
Okay.
Thank you, President Wong. I think that was an excellent explanation of the status here. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Ms. Morgan, since some of the discussion is in closed session, I am limited to doing factual corrections. So yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for your understanding. With that, do I have any other members of public that wish to address the board at this time? Hearing none and seeing none, the next is closed session. And let me bring up my glasses. So next is closed session, item 4.1, pursuant to California Government Code 54956.8. Conference with real property negotiator, property N3 cattle company consisting of 131 parcels. Sorry, next page. Approximately 50,535 acres in Alameda County, Santa Clara County, San Joaquin County, and Stanislaus County. Assessors' parcel numbers were furnished by owner's representative and are attached to this agenda. Agency negotiators, Robert Shaver and Ed Stevenson. Negotiating parties, N3 Cattle Company, LLC, Rand Jr. and Rand Jr. trustee under negotiation, price and terms of payment. With that, I believe we will move to a separate room, but before that, Mr. Shaver, that just confirmed we will be back at about 4 o'clock. Is that correct?
That is the plan. Your agenda says that we will be back no earlier than 4 p.m.
Right.
Our goal is to be back by 4.
Okay, that's a clarification I need. Thank you. All back, let me double check. Director Akbari, Gunther, Sethi, Weed. Okay. So time is 4:03. The board returned from closed session and oh my glasses. And the item is, let's see.
The item is item 5.
Right, I need to bring it up. Thank you, Gina. And 3 is item 4.1, pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.8, conference with real property negotiator, property N3 Cattle Company consisting of 131 parcels, approximately 50,535 acres in Alameda County, Santa Clara County, San Joaquin County, and Stanislaus County. Assessors' parcel numbers were furnished by owner's representative and are attached to this agenda. Agency negotiators, Robert Shaver and Ed Stevenson. Negotiating parties, N3 Cattle Company, LLC, Rand Jr. and Rand Jr. trustee, under negotiation, price and term of payment. And the agency negotiators provided an update to the board. And that concludes my report back for the closed session. So let's move on to item 5, financial workshop.
Thank you, Madam President. Welcome, members of the public. This is the third in a series of financial workshops scheduled for calendar year 2020. The first 2 workshops focused on the district budget and the advanced metering infrastructure project. This workshop will focus on water rates and the district's current financial status and operating conditions. And we will touch on a number of topics, including an overview of cost of service requirements that must be followed when setting water rates, a discussion that will focus on the allocation between the fixed service charges and the commodity charges relative to collecting revenue, but it could also include other issues that are related to that. A review of charges for dedicated fire service lines, and an update on the district's current financial status and operating conditions based on actual fiscal year 2019-20 results. And that will include, and I'm glad that Ms. Morgan is still with us, a discussion of the N3 cattle ranch, but only as it pertains to the finances of the district. And then we'll also talk about funding for long-term pension and other post-employment benefit liabilities. So with that, I will pass this along to our Manager of Finance, Jonathan Wunderlich, who will lead us along.
Mr. Shaver, Paul Sethi here.
Yes, sir.
How much time were you allocating for the financial workshop, this portion, number 5?
So there are approximately 70 PowerPoint slides, some of which we wanted to make sure that we included in the public record because we know that the board is very familiar with some of these topics. Staff has advised me that we certainly can get through the presentation within an hour, but that doesn't include input and commentary from the board or the public.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shaver. Hopefully everybody can see my screen now with the presentation. And so, as was discussed in the overview Mr. Shaver provided, we do plan on having our consultant, Raftalis, who is in the meeting today, provide an overview of cost of service requirements. Again, we know that the board has seen and heard this a number of times, but for the benefit of any members of the public, we did want to provide a brief overview on that in today's workshop. During the budget workshops, there was a request from the board that we talk about fixed versus variable charges and revenue. So we do have a number of slides on that. And then the last item that Raftalis will be presenting is dedicated fire service lines. It's been quite some time since the district really took a close look at those, and we do think it's appropriate to do that again. And so the consultant will be providing a brief overview there. And then staff will present updates to our financial plan as well as various scenarios for discussion. There are a few items that we're requesting board guidance on this evening, specifically potential revisions to the fixed versus variable revenue allocation, as well as updates to the dedicated fire service line rates and updating the cost of service analysis and potential rate adjustments. Staff does at the end of the presentation have some suggested recommendations in these areas, which I will just briefly outline before we get into the meat of the presentation. And that is, at this time, staff is not recommending revisions to the fixed variable revenue allocation, nor a specific rate adjustment. We are, however, recommending that we complete an updated cost of service analysis. It's been over 5 years since the last one was completed. And that would also allow us through that process to look at our dedicated fire service line rates, because that is a cost of service issue. So you would have to do a cost of service analysis to update those rates. So with that brief introduction, I will transition to Mr. Gar from Raftalis to walk us through his presentation. All right, and you are on mute.
Thank you, John, for that. President, board members, staff, and public, I'd like to conduct our presentation associated with the rate study. I'm going to share my screen here. I wish I was there meeting you in person, but as we all know, we're living in interesting times. You can see my presentation, the cover slide. John, maybe you can give me a thumbs up.
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to get started here with the rate discussion. As we're going to be talking about cost of service, as John mentioned, we're going to be talking about the fixed and revenue discussion, and then the public and private fire. If you have any questions or comments, definitely let me know and we can talk about them. Cost of service analysis. There's a couple of, when setting rates, as you may know, there are a couple of legal requirements we need to make sure we meet. The most important, of course, is Prop 218, which basically states that there needs to be a proportionality between the rates and the cost. And so what we do is we actually look at your cost structure. We look at the cost of running your business, and we look at that cost structure, we look at the revenues, the rates, and we mirror those two together. Besides Prop 218, which is in the California Constitution, we also have Article 10 of the Constitution, which says that water should be used reasonably. We recommend that we try to harmonize between those two. Most legal court cases have been around, of course, Prop 218. The most famous court case associated with water rates is San Juan Capistrano, where a group of citizens sued the city over its rate structure. The Orange County Appellate Court agreed that it did not meet the proportionality requirement. And the main factor was this lack of what we call administrative record or a report that really detailed the cost structure. It was a lot of boilerplate stuff. The consultant that did that work, we didn't do it. It was a black box, basically. And so what we want to do is we will develop a model in Excel. We want to have it very transparent. So someone can read it, they can look at it, all the numbers are there, all the math is there. The other thing is this arbitrariness with the tiered rates and just sort of not a rationality behind it. And that arbitrary doesn't necessarily only apply to tiered rates, it can apply to anything. So we want to have a logic and rationality with our rate structure. That of course mirrors your business model of your situation that you're in. So the main thing is that we need to have a look at your cost structure. There needs to be a nexus between that, and we need to show our work. So cost of service is basically understanding that first, there's a cost of running the business. There's a different cost associated with, for instance, your supply sources. You have different sources of supply, but it also takes into account customer characteristics. People use your system differently. Some people use a lot of water in the summertime, less in the winter, et cetera. So we want to understand that profile of customer use and your system and marry those two together. And so that we make sure that no one necessarily subsidize or one customer over another, and there's a logic and rationality behind that within cost of service. This is just an illustrated example here where we have two systems. You can think of system 2 right over here. This is a system that may have a lot, would have a lot of outdoor irrigation, as you can see in the summer period here, and in the wintertime, not so much. And then system 1, where it's pretty much flat throughout the year. And the question you have to ask yourself is, if you're designing a water system, storage facilities, pump stations, et cetera, how much infrastructure would you need for system 1 versus system 2? And of course, system 2 would have a lot more needs. It would have a lot more additional costs. And so that's the same thing applies to our customers. Some of our customers use the system, they swing on and off the system. And that swinging on and off the system causes us to have additional capacity, and they should pay for that capacity when it's idle. So basically what we do is we first determine how much revenue you want to collect on an annual basis. We have these jargons, my apologies for that, but in the industry we call it revenue requirement. But you can basically think about how much you want to collect. The next thing we want to do is then we want to start asking ourselves, well, how much does it cost to purchase water? We know that you have groundwater, there's a mix between groundwater, SFPUC water, you have the state water, you have all these different other sources. So we want to take that into account. We want to take into account your conservation program. We have what we call base delivery. That's what we call average delivery demand. We have that peak. That's for that summertime. We have meter maintenance, cost to maintain the meter, and then customer service to issue a bill. So we look at all these things. We also ask ourselves then, where should we collect it? Should we collect it on the variable? Should we collect it on the fixed? Typically, supply conservation is definitely on the variable. Typically, what's on the fixed is meter maintenance, customer service. And where the policy comes into is how much base and how much extra capacity should be on the variable and fixed. And that's where we have a wiggle room within Prop 218 to meet the goals and objectives of the board. So once we know how much those costs are, then we start allocating those costs. And so that's basically dividing by a denominator to get a unit rate. So supply is usually based on HCF, delivery costs again by HCF, conservation typically on the higher tiers, that's typical, capacity either on peaking factors by customer class or by meter size, meter maintenance again by ratios associated with the cost, and then customer service by the number of counts, because it costs the same to issue a bill regardless if you use 1 unit or 1,000 units. Then once we have those building blocks, another way to think about it is Lego. If you have kids, you have your little building blocks. Now you can start adding things together. And you have a logic and rationality. So I have my supply, delivery, extra capacity, conservation. I can add them up to have a volumetric rate. Same logic applies to the meter charge. Again, I look at those little components. I can add them up and I get the total service. So I have how much I want to collect, distribute them to cost, and then eventually start allocating them to rate. So there's a logic and rationality with that. Now, in the last study that we did in 2015, we went through the same process here. We have the different cost components. We asked ourselves how much we're going to collect, whether fixed or variable. As you can see, the base delivery peaking, that's where that policy came in, how much should be between those two. And we allocated them. So basic 2% of your cost is associated with customer service, 4% roughly, a little bit more is meter maintenance, base delivery 54%, peaking 24%, and then supply was 13%, which makes sense in your service area, especially given how demand has dropped. I would suspect as we go through this, we'll see these percentages slightly changing. It'll be interesting to see how they change relative to that. So now we want to talk about fixed and variable. And the question is how much should we collect? What has happened in the past with the agency? Where should we go in the future? So as we all know, and you know this very well, that you're a fixed cost business. There's a lot of fixed costs associated with it that doesn't change. And there's some variable For instance, if you need to buy certain types of water, some of it it's already there, but some of it there is some marginal cost and chemical and treatment costs associated with it. Now, your system, actually, we have the data, we looked at it, 74% of your cost is fixed. 26% of it is variable. Now, as an industry, you know, I have the honor of doing a lot of these studies. That varies. It depends on how much groundwater and how much imported water. So if you're very much a groundwater agency, that can be as high as 95%, 90% fixed. If you are very much an imported water agency, you're 100% SFPUC, or if you're down in Southern California, 100% metropolitan, I can see all the way 60% fixed. So there's a little bit of swing here, depending on the agency and the cost structure. So this business model, I call it the fixed cost variable revenue business model. You know, this legacy of having a lot of revenue on the on the variable side, excuse me, and less on the fixed charge historically as a community in the water agency worked very well when water sales was increasing significantly, or increasing, not even significantly, just increasing. And because we're advertising that variable revenue, all the revenues on sales. As sales just naturally increased, we naturally increased our revenue, and we didn't necessarily increase our costs. Now, the challenge is that we're in this new era where sales are dropping. And this is that era where, and you've seen that with your rates have has increased past historically because of the reduction in sales. And you have firsthand experience with that. And why is that? As you know, awareness of conservation, lifestyle changing. I'm sure you've seen that. I've seen that in California in the last 20, 30 years. People's changing. Used to be, you know, the green lawn was sacred, I joke around, but now people are okay with having different types of landscaping and use appliance and then increased regulatory demand. So, you know, the industry's changed. We've asked ourselves, yes, we want to increase the fixed charge, but it's always a balancing act. And the balancing act has changed over time. It used to be, I would argue, revenue stability, conservation. Now I would say that the balancing act is revenue stability and affordability and ability to control the bill. So conservation, you know, we as a community, we've done great after the 2015 drought. We haven't really seen a rebound. You know, maybe it's too good of a job. But, you know, we're doing well in the sense of conservation, but the affordability is the challenge. And as we increase that fixed charge, as we all know, it does affect certain segments of our community. And the question is should we do that or not?
So that's maybe, Sanjay, you could go back to the previous slide. It's maybe a good opportunity just for me to let the full board know that in last week's Finance Committee meeting, it was requested that we bring the Help on Tap program to the board at the September board meeting. And so, you know, that obviously relates very much to the affordability issue, especially for our lowest income customers. And particularly concern was expressed by committee members about the COVID-19 pandemic and how that may be affecting our customers. And, you know, maybe somebody experienced an income reduction, but maybe not quite all the way down to the level that gets them on the program, and they may be struggling with that income reduction. And so we just wanted to put it on the full board's radar that as staff, we are looking at various options related to benefit amounts, related to income thresholds and standards to be eligible for the program. And that, you know, our plan is to present some ideas and engage the board in discussion at the regular September board meeting and try to get feedback. And then we would come back in October for board action once we have that feedback and know maybe how exactly we might craft a couple of options for the board to consider acting on.
And I might also add that normally we go through this process in December, but the members of the Finance Committee requested that we consider reviewing this sooner than that. And it might be good timing too, because I was contacted by Paul Eldridge, the general manager of Union Sanitary District, and they are also considering implementing some sort of low-income assistance program. And we discussed the possibility of perhaps the program being administered by ACWD on behalf of USD, with USD reimbursing us for our associated costs to do that work for them. There's a lot of details, and Mr. Eldridge has not even reviewed this with his board yet, this possibility. But, you know, we talk frequently about ways in which our two agencies can coordinate on things. So I thought that this was potentially an exciting new development. So that may or may not be ripe by the time we get back to the board. But I just wanted to also put that on your radar screen. So that's some of the background information of why we would come back in September with possible alternatives.
Yeah, and certainly staff will be considering alternatives, but, you know, certainly board members, if you have any thoughts, now's the time to maybe, you know, think about that and what ideas you might have that you would like to bring to us in September.
This is John Weed. May I make a quick comment? The dollar amount we're speaking about with Help on Tap is a little over 0.1% of the total water revenues. It's noise. And talking about our rate structure, it really is, I would suggest, is not a economically relevant factor.
Thank you for your comment. I believe staff is just letting us know that we will be hearing about this item in September. So for now, let's just move on. Mr. Gar.
Thank you for your comments. So now I want to just talk about this historical occurrence. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of reasons why rates have increased. One of those reasons, of course, is the reduction in sales. Another one is increased regulatory demand. Another one is increased need to replace the system. Alameda is an older community. Those systems have been need to be replaced. Rates need to pay for that. And that's what we see here. What we're saying here is the service charge going from 1992, so it's pretty far back. We have the service charge, we have the consumption charge, we have the total bill right over here. And as you can see, it's significantly increased. And the survey medium, though, this is not, you're not unique. This has happened throughout all of California where you've seen this increase. And if we did this throughout California, you would see the same trend. Actually, it's been 6% increase in the last 11 years each year annually is what our survey results show us. So this is the challenge that we're facing. Next, I want to show you the percent of the fixed charge relative to 16 units. So this is our representative customer of 16 for this billing period. And as you can see, back in 92, it was around 20%. It was, you know, stayed there roughly. And then in 2013, that's when the significant increases occurred that the board did. And, you know, hindsight, it was, you know, it was great that you did do it. I mean, it was challenging politically, of course, but as we all know, in 2015, we had the drought. And that sort of helped the agency quite a bit in that challenge that we faced. But right now, you're at 43% for this representative customer of your total fixed charge. And the question we need to ask ourselves, is that appropriate? You know, 43%, you know, is that, should we increase it more? You could theoretically even decrease it. And, you know, so these are the things that we need to think about. But I just want to show that you have historically increased it quite a bit, from 20% roughly to now 43%. Next, what we want to show you is total revenues by different agencies in your service area. Staff did an excellent job in gathering this data. I want to thank Martin Sid for doing that. And so these are representative agencies here. We're not disclosing who they are, but what we're showing you is the percent of revenue that's fixed relative to the commodity. Alameda is basically 33%. So you're sort of in this bandwidth. The 40% of total revenue is what I've been seeing in the communities, in water agencies. I would say in the 90s or in 2000, the early 2000s, it was more like 20-30%. And now because of the drought, because of all these challenges that we're facing, water agencies are slowly increasing it. And they're now in this 30 to 40% bandwidth. So from a, if we look at your peers, you're in the pack.
Sanjay, Paul, Seth,
Yes.
I have a question there.
Mm-hmm.
You're just showing 43% on the previous slide.
Mm-hmm.
Here you're showing 33%.
Correct.
On the
And the 43, thank you for bringing that up. The 43% was a representative bill of 16 units. And now this is of the total use. So you do have some large industry in your service area. You have larger people who use it. So we're looking at the total revenues of the whole system.
Yes, so the issue is that our commercial industrial customers, as well as the multifamily residential, where you have many units served by 1 meter, they're much more heavily weighted toward commodity charge revenues. And so system-wide, then you end up at 33% on the fixed charge.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sanjay, if I can ask a question as well on this slide.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier that there's some variability between districts based on their source of supply. The districts that we're looking at here, are they like districts in terms of having similar sources of supply to ACWD, or are we looking at districts that are both reliant on importing water and districts that are using local sources?
So maybe I'll take that one. So these are the normal 30 agencies we compare against in the Bay Area.
Okay.
And so there's a mix. You get some of them like East Bay Mud and Contra Costa that largely manage all of their own supplies.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also a lot of cities, say over on the peninsula, that are 100% reliant on SFPUC. So there's a good mix.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Well, since we are asking questions, do I have any other questions from other directors? If not, do I have any questions or comments from members of the public at this point? If you wish to address the board or have questions, please raise your hand or speak up. And I am not seeing any hands, so with that, let's move on. Mr. Gar?
Thank you. So one of the other things to think about, so I've presented, I'm presenting you different views of whether we should increase the fixed charge or not. One was as an industry, one as, your peers. The other is just sort of how do we view water? And, is water a commodity? Is it a service? Of course, it's both. Historically, we've been viewing water as a commodity, but as time has progressed, we're saying more and more it's a service. And as you can see, there's different pros and cons of these different approaches, why you would want to do this. The service concept is gaining more and more traction in the community, but the challenge with that, of course, is the affordability. And how do we address that issue? So now if we...
Is there a possibility to just briefly comment on that?
Mm-hmm.
On the issue of affordability, are going into COVID-19 and all the financial problems, modest, nominal impact on our rates and no impact at all on multi-meter accounts, zero. So affordability, I would argue, in ACWD's position, is not a financially significant issue for rates. Second, water, we have plentiful water, and moreover, we have a capacity of anywhere from 2 to 4 times the demand. So capacity and be able to meet the requirements. So ACWD is essentially a service-oriented organization, and the issues related to the commodity here, I would argue, don't apply to us.
Director Sethi, I totally agree with Director Weed's comments, fully.
So thank you, Director Wee and Director Sethi. I would have to disagree. I think affordability for our community is still an issue. Plus, I believe we have not seen the complete picture of the financial impact from COVID to our district yet.
Let me quickly add to that. Affordability can be addressed on a per persona basis. It doesn't need to warp your rate structure in order to accomplish some type of an affordability.
We disagree on that, and I believe we will have a really good discussion when we're talking about the rate structure, the actual structure. So I would suggest at this point, Mr. Gar, would you continue?
Yes, thank you. So what next we did is we actually now are diving into your specific cost structure. And so what we have right over here is we looked at how much of your cost, your operating cost is fixed. And of the total cost, that's 47%. We looked at your capital cost, which is of course fixed. That's you spend on it, you need to renew your system, 28%. And the variable component of your cost structure is 26%. So next what we do is then we look at your revenue side of your business and we ask ourselves, well, how much of it's fixed and cost? You have property taxes. As you know, you have two sources of property tax, the groundwater, state water project. That's roughly 10% of your revenue. You have your service charge, and that's the meter charge, that's 31%. Next, what we do is then we look at the consumption. Now, one of the things that's interesting that's occurred in the industry is that so as we know, we had a high consumption in 2013, the drought hit us in 2015. It was a significant time, the district, I was with you then. And you met the challenge, but we had to reduce water use. One of the things that happened since then is that we anticipated demand to increase, and we just saw a mild increase that occurred. So most of that consumption, we would argue, is reliable, 51% of your total cost structure. So that's for indoor needs. People need to use that water no matter what, for health and safety. And only 8% of your total revenue we would consider at risk. That would be if something happened with weather conditions, where people may change their behavior because of outdoor needs. Next, what we do is then we ask ourselves, well, given that information that we have, and then we look at the hydrological conditions associated with the system. So this is basically, the first thing we want to do is focus on this. Your total expenditure that that you're spending is $123 million. Basically $91 million is operating, $34 million is capital. And that's what this shows right here. This is just to meet operating costs, you need $91 million. If you want to also fund your capital, you need $34 million. Next, what we show you is different hydrological conditions and the sales and revenues associated with that. So during a wet year, right over here, we have the different cost components associated with property tax, service charge, just reliable consumption, and then the consumption that we say is variable. You're, of course, meeting that cost structure. You're actually a little bit above it. Things are good. What about a dry year? What will happen hydrologically during a dry year? Well, even a dry year, you're still, of course, meeting your costs, and actually consumption's increased because of demand and less water available. So, of course, the question to ask ourselves is, what will happen during a drought? And the most important thing when a drought occurs is, first, can we meet our operating costs? And the question is, yes, we can meet our operating costs, as you can see here. So this is total revenue. This is the expenditure. We're above that. The shortfall would happen is $9 million, and that's this delta right over here, that we wouldn't be able to fund our capital project. Now, this analysis doesn't take into account potential savings that would occur from reduction in sales, because by selling less water, you would also incur less savings. You incur savings, excuse me, from expenditure. It also doesn't take into account stage rates that we have, the drought rates that we could put in place if a drought occurred. Lastly, the other thing to note is that your reserves are healthy. In the next part of the presentation, we'll be talking about your fund balances, and your fund balances can easily absorb this $9 million. So from a risk perspective associated with a drought, you're fine. Now, of course, if the drought was just, permanent for the next 10 years, of course, that would be a shift. But if the drought's a year or two, you have the reserves, you have the mechanisms to deal with that. Okay. So what's our observation? First thing we've noticed is that since 2011, the service charge has historically increased. That's helped the agency to deal with the 2014-2015 drought. So that was great that we did do that. The district has basically other sources of revenue to help with revenue stability. Basically 41% of your revenues is fixed. That's the service charge and property tax. Demand has been reduced significantly in the last 10 years. And most of the water that we're using, we would consider it reliable core demand water. So because of that, we say 51% of your total revenue is considered reliable, and only 8% of your revenue is exposed to this risk factor. So given the reserve levels, the district can absorb that risk. You could use reserves to absorb that risk if you desire. And now with the pandemic that's occurring, demand has actually increased. And so the question, we need to ask ourselves is, do we want to increase it? Do we not want to increase it? based on my observation and based on this, I mean, these are policies. So first thing, that's the first thing. So, and it's really a balancing act of, the marginal benefit associated with increasing it and the marginal cost on the sense of affordability, ability to control the bill. And you, of course, you have to weigh those because those are policies.
Yeah, so I think this is the last slide in this section. And as I alluded to at the very beginning, based on, as we went through this analysis with Sanjay and put this information together from staff's perspective, as we looked at it, we didn't necessarily feel that we needed to look at any changes in this process, but certainly if there's feedback from directors or questions, we'd love to hear that.
Okay, John Weed. I'm concerned that this does not reflect our experience during the last drought, which to me is a less theoretical approach to the question, where we had over a 21% drop over 20%, and 23% or so reduction in water sales. We saw a $16 million loss in revenues over 3 years, but for the increase in our service charge, it might have been 80 million. So that 8% number, I believe, from based on our own experience with the last drought, should be more than double.
Yeah, so I think the issue and why that's only 8% is that our water demands in our district have not increased to the levels they were before the drought. And so as a result, we're treating the levels we had during the drought as kind of a baseline. So certainly, if we had a drought that was even worse than the last one or some other type of disaster situation, of course, it's always possible that demands could go lower than they were in the last drought. But from a planning perspective, we did use the demands in the last drought as the baseline.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wee. Any other questions or comments from the board?
I'll make a couple, President Long.
Director Sethi?
So I've said for some time now, after we made all these adjustments in our fixed charge, and I was the primary advocate going back 10 years to raise the fixed service charge quite a bit, 100% at one point, that we have reached a comfort level here, especially coming out of the drought, where, as Sanjay is pointing out, we are only at risk for 8%, but even if it were 15%, I still feel comfortable with where our fixed charge is. And if you look at our property tax revenue, plus the fixed charge, plus what we would call stable revenue, we're in a really good, and I would say a handsome position as a district financially. And this was always my goal from even before the time I was on the board. I was expressing that we needed to get to some level of reliable revenue reliability and predictability, revenue stability. And I stated in one of the recent meetings, if we look forward on rate increases over the next 10 years, the prospective rate increases, we've really reached that sweet spot that is admirable for any water district in the state. So I would not change anything as to where we are right now. I support the staff in saying, don't make any changes at all.
Oh, if I might.
Sethi, Director Wee?
There are a number of reasons to have a rational rate structure. One that matches variable expenses with variable cost and fixed cost. One is, I think, the definition of what is a variable cost, something I'd like to look into. I was once told that the cost of your commodity is water, power, and chemicals. That was the variable. And then your variable income should reflect that. We've thrown in some other factors in here. And I'm concerned that in our accounting, we use different factors for water supply to compute the income statement versus the balance sheet. But in conservation, the real key is not the dollar amount. We know that affordability is not an issue in our district. But if we're going to promote conservation, the real factor then is for people to have a realistic understanding that when they reduce their consumption by 10%, they see a 10% reduction in their commodity cost. That's not present currently, and it's way off. So I would hope that we could make our commodity cost 100% variable and our fixed cost, and truly cover it, and then take that fixed charge, which is not a part of this, in the billing mechanism, and bill it on the property tax bill. It makes life so much easier in addressing the affordability issues when you get the commodity cost to where it should be at no more than 25% and arguably less of the total bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wheat. Any other director that wish to comment?
Director Gunther, I was the swing vote on that 100%, and I've said for several times now that we are where we should be, it looks like, and I think we've hit that point, and I will be quiet for a few moments and hear what the rest of the presentation goes like.
Thank you. Director Akbari?
I don't have any questions or comments right now, but I'll just make a quick, I guess maybe one comment. I think it's been suggested a couple times now that affordability isn't a concern within our community, and I would certainly vehemently push back on that. I do think affordability is top of mind for many of our residents. It's why, when we do have suggestions for rate, or when we do have public meetings to discuss rate increases, our boardroom is packed. It's because affordability is a key concern within our community. It's the reason why we did introduce the Help on Tap program, and why, being on the finance committee, I suggested that we look at that program again and look to expand the program. There are a lot of people in our community who are suffering, especially right now, given the current circumstances. We may not hear from them on a daily basis, but that doesn't mean that they're not going through some pretty difficult times working in the service industry, working at companies that may no longer be financially viable. So that's the pushback that I would hope that my fellow board members will keep in mind. Affordability is definitely a key concern in our community, and we should definitely not downplay that.
Director Akbari, as a response, when I joined the board, I was the first to propose a Help on Tap program in the Finance Committee, and working with Director Weed, we identified where we had non-water revenues that could contribute to a program like this. And I would dispute what your claim here that you're making in a public meeting, that we have had our boardroom packed with people that are complaining about affordability. That is absolute nonsense.
Really?
I would definitely disagree.
You have a few people, and we have aggressively tried to improve that Help on Tap program. That is not a program that you initiated or started in the community, and I take great offense to it.
So Director Sethi?
If I could make a non-pejorative comment. First of all, I agree that affordability is a concern. It has, the word itself is, can be alarming. And we've made attempts to address it. But from a financial standpoint, what we've done today has been almost a nominal cost. 1,000 customers at $12.50 per month. But what's the challenge we have is that the people who primarily need it are on multi-customers sharing a meter. They don't pay the bill directly. And we've had 0 defaults under COVID-19 or delays in payment for those type of individuals. So the practicality is that it's not we've not seen the impact on individuals. And the total dollar amount necessary to address it is 0.012% of our total revenues of 112 million. We're maybe $130,000. Our administrative costs on that are probably at least half. So it's from a rate structure standpoint, it's not a driver. It gives us great flexibility in ways to address it, including a zero tier, particularly if we properly assign the fixed cost against commodity cost and assign the fixed cost to the property owners.
Thank you for your comment, Director.
I couldn't agree
Hold
with you
on.
more, Director Weed.
Hold on. I have been quiet. I think it's my turn. I happen to agree with Director Akbari. We do have people coming to our board talking about affordability. Yes, at the rate hearing, we have a mixture of people talk about affordability, about fairness, about our operational cost. They don't all, not 100% of all the people that come to our rate hearing protest about affordability, but there's a segment of the population in our community. This is definitely an issue. I can remember at least 2 occasions that people actually came to the board meeting. Our customer actually came specifically talk about the affordability for them as a household. To address Director Weed's comment, yes, often multifamily bill payers for multifamily accounts, they usually have an association or business entity that pays their bills. That's probably why they pay their bill on time. Our customers, we have a lot of single family or people who has just paid their not multi-meter accounts. They definitely have affordability issues and concerns. Looping back to this presentation, I would say that we should not change the split between fixed and variable cost. We have enough stopgap in place and we have enough reserve in place to weather the drought. We actually have our drought stage rate that we could actually activate if we really have financial issues. Seeing the importance of affordability, understanding COVID, and not really have a good sense of how it would impact our customers. This is not a good time to change the split between fixed and variable. We need to understand how it impacts our customer and how it actually financially impact our district before we pull that trigger. So I definitely agree with staff's observation that currently there's no need to adjust the split between fixed and variable. So with that, I'm actually going to open it up to our community members, see if they have any comments, if they wish to address the board. If you wish to address the board, please either raise your hand or speak up. Ms. Morgan?
Yes. So I've been to lots of these meetings, and many of the meetings are filled with people who cannot afford their bill. And with their costs going up and their service meter rates going up, paying more for your meter rate than your water, I am deeply offended by Director Weed and Paul Sethi, who don't look at individual people. They look at their little numbers and, oh, it's not going to be a problem if we raise it such and such number. We are ratepayers out here, and I was offended. Mr. Sethi, I mean, I'm not sure what Aziz said that offended you. I mean, I don't really care when that help on tap was originated. I applied for it the first time it came out, and I made what, $2,000 more than I should have done? I mean, we go to the meetings and complain. And so I'm going to say, Aziz, thank you for your comments, and Judy, thank you for your support. I don't want to be just considered a 0.0001 cost of, you know, raising a rate. So I think you should keep and then to put it on your property tax bill. Come on, control your rates. Let's not buy N3 cattle ranch. I mean, come on. Sorry.
Ms. Morgan, if I may reply, this is a workshop, so we do have some discourse with the public.
Yep.
You know, we have mapped out over, I think it's somewhere around 8,000 protests on water rate increases.
Yeah.
And 90% of those complaints come from the wealthiest people in our community.
Well,
The wealthiest, we mapped it out from the wealthiest people. So I understand and appreciate that there are people at the lower income scale in our community that do need assistance and help. And that's why when I first came on the board, I proposed the Help on Tap program and to explore where we could use non-water revenues to support our lower end of the income scale in our community. And at every opportunity, Director Weed and I on the Finance Committee for 9 years have been exploring how to broaden and increase our Help on Tap program. So don't misunderstand that we are not trying to address the concerns of that part of our community. Also, understand that our rates, as compared to the 30 agencies and cities that we compare rates to around the Bay Area, are consistently in the lowest 20%, 30% of the Bay Area. And by water district, we are consistently one of the bottom two with East Bay mud. So that's where our costs are and the affordability of water to our ratepayers. Do we have opportunities to explore other programs that could help our ratepayers? Yes, of course. And I've recently been doing a comparison of Bay Area water districts and the programs that they offer. I'm going to be bringing that to the board at some point in the future, where I've identified several other programs that can help our ratepayers in the district. But I want to remind you that 90% of the complaints in our district have come from the wealthiest people in our community, period.
Ms. Morgan, this is John Weed. You mentioned my name as well.
Yeah.
I believe we can do more to help people on the affordability range. And my point was that the total dollar amount we're now spending, a little over 0.1%, is not something that gives us the opportunity to spend more money. I'm concerned that when we develop fairly expensive administrative programs to help those individuals, I would hope there are ways we could do that more effectively. But we have room to work on this. But to build an entire rate structure and change the commodities, have to keep much larger reserves than we would otherwise need in order to try and chase 0.1%, which we've currently identified as being the concern, is not a rational financial practice. And and in the end, it doesn't help people on the affordability range, because we have tied our hands in our inability to help those people with an awkward rate structure. An awkward rate structure which has grown worse in recent years. On the last rate increase, we were told that 95% of that rate increase was needed for service charge, and 5% of the rate increase was needed for additional commodity cost. And yet we retained a reverse flip, making the situation even worse. I would hope going forward, we would get that same report again and at least match any rate increase to mirror the increase in service charges and what is an increase in the commodity cost. That would be responsible. What we're doing now is less than responsible.
So thank you, Ms. Morgan. Thank you, Director Wee and Director Savvy. I have to say the SCORE has very different opinions on the data, how we view data, and the comments we received, and we will respect each other on the differences. Before moving on, I see I have a member of the public raise his hand. Mr. Nishimura.
Okay, can you hear me? I just want to make sure I'm unmuted.
Yes, you are unmuted.
Yes, okay. President Wong, I asked that I be allowed to make a general comment, basically because of my work conflict. I was unable to make general comments at the start of the meeting. So may I proceed?
hold on. Mr. Miyagi, I think it's okay for us to reopen public comment.
Yes, that's totally up to the board whether you want to do that or not.
All right. Yes, Mr. Nishimura, please proceed.
Yes. So I have input on a couple of general topics, and then maybe based on the previous public comment, I have a third point to make. First of all, I find it irritating that a workshop on rate structure is being held at 4 o'clock during working hours when many of your rate-paying customers, including myself, are trying to earn a living to in part pay their water bills. The district sees fit to hold regular meetings at 6 p.m., yet a workshop where the public could have interest in providing input is scheduled at an hour, which minimizes the ability of the public to provide input. Just because many of us are quote unquote working at home doesn't mean that we can nonchalantly drop our work obligations to attend a district workshop during normal business hours. The timing seems a bit duplicitous.
Mr. Nishimura, do you have any further comment for the board?
Yeah, yes, I do. Yes, the second topic has to do with the real estate purchase. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the district is entertaining the purchase of the N3 ranch, maybe now better described as the N3 charcoal farm. For the past few months, the board has been furtively meeting under the cloak of closed sessions, but the material for today's financial update clearly shows analysis to explore the feasibility of an outright purchase of the N3 ranch for $68 million. Let's be clear, the district has collected too much money in the recent past and has a general fund balance well in excess of target. This does not mean that the district should blow the excess on a land acquisition that, to first order, appears to have little or no benefit for the ratepayers. Put another way, is this the best way for the district to spend $68 million? Perhaps the district shouldn't spend it and look at how that surplus could be used to reduce rates for its customers. Hypothetically speaking, if forced to spend $68 million, early extinguishment of the OPEB liability, preparing for potential impacts from PFOA and PFAS, acceleration of infrastructure improvements, reduction of water hardness in the northern service area, expansion of desalination, which is our lowest cost source of water, are examples of projects that have clear benefits to the customer by reduction of expenses, improving system reliability, and/or improvements in water quality. I am deeply troubled that the financial modeling for the district includes a scenario for a major expenditure for which the district has not clearly articulated the benefits to the ratepayers. While I appreciate the need to keep certain aspects of the negotiation private, the fundamental cost-benefit analysis, the parameters of which are openly available, needs to be done transparently with the well-being of the ratepayer in mind and well before a point of no return in the district decision-making process. ACWD, I'll stop there. I have further comments about rate structures and tiered rates. To Director Sethi's comment about the 8,000 protest letters being received from the quote unquote wealthiest areas of the district, that doesn't surprise me because that demographic has the ability to organize and submit protests to the district. I'm going to remind the district that under Article 13, Subpart C of the California Constitution, aka Proposition 218, that the threshold for initiatives to overturn rate increases is only 5% of the number of people who voted in the last gubernatorial election. Simple arithmetic shows that 8,000 exceeds that threshold. So, the district may say we had 8,000 protests, but it doesn't meet 50% plus one. It does exceed the 5% threshold to put something as an initiative on the ballot, which could completely undermine all this work that's being done to set the rates. So that's just a fact that maybe the board should be reminded of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nishimura. With that, do I have any other comments from our customers? If not, I would ask Mr. Nishimura, please put down your hand. Ms. Morgan, do you have comments for me?
I really support what he's saying. I mean, we can't afford N3 cattle ranch. Come on. Everything else he said was correct. You guys need to listen to the ratepayers. Hello, we're out here. I'm not a wealthy person. I live on a teacher pension. And I protest all the time. You guys don't listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. With that, Mr. Guard, let's move on.
If I may, President
Okay.
Long, just add a couple of quick points.
Okay.
And I'll really maybe just one point geared toward Ms. Morgan. You referenced that you were just barely ineligible for help on tap. And I don't know when the last time was that you checked, but the increase the board approved earlier this year significantly increased the threshold for 1- and 2-person households. So the threshold for 1- and 2-person households is now about $50,000 in annual income. And I would just encourage you to check again and see if you might now be eligible.
Thank you, Mr. Wunderlich. Anything else for the board?
That was it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Guard?
All right. So we've discussed now the fixed, we've talked about the cost of service, the fixed and variable. Now I want to talk a little bit about public-private fire and what that is. There's been a lot of attention associated with this area, given different lawsuits that have occurred in the past. And I just want to make sure we all understand what we're doing here and what we would like to do in the future. So just a little background first. First, the district has around 2,400 private dedicated fire service lines that for commercial multifamily. The main service lines is with a 2-inch meter to 10-inch meter. There is also a bypass meter for the 5/8 3/4 inch. These counts are billed a private service rate for the meter on the main service line, plus the regular service charge for the bypass meter. And this is roughly $1 million. The district, last time we did this cost of service analysis, we did not address the private fire service line. Raftellus' recommendation is to look at that and to update the cost of service to reflect that. And also, in addition, the last cost of service was done 5 years ago. So it's always best industry practice to do it every 5 years. So let's get some definitions here. There's a lot of terminology we use in this industry, and we may all not be on the same page. So what we're talking about is fire. First, there's fire protection. And fire protection includes both public, which are the hydrants that you may see around your neighborhood, and private, which are the fire sprinkler systems that you may see it right above me. I have a fire sprinkler right over there, so upper pole. It may be also in a commercial establishment, and it may be in multifamily. I suspect staff at the district have maybe a fire sprinkler on their wall, which I don't see, and I don't see Pat, if he showed his ceiling, he may have one too. Direct fire protection costs. These are the costs to maintain the fire lines. And they're usually identified, the hydrants, those are identified in the budget. So that's easy. Now the indirect cost is what we're really getting at. And that's the additional capacity that's needed to deal with a fire. So hopefully we don't have a fire. Unfortunately, as you know, there's lots of fires occurring, unfortunately, in California. But it's that capacity that we need in case a fire occurs. And the question is how much, who should pay for that additional capacity? And that capacity, first thing, that fire capacity is broken between public and private. So first we need to identify the capacity. And what we do is we look at base, as I talked about earlier on in my cost of service analysis. We have base, and then we have additional capacity to meet above average demand. The words and terminology we use in the industry is peak day, peak hour. Some people call it peaking demand capacity, but the system is designed for the hottest day plus fire. So fire, the cost of fire is more about the capacity. It's not necessarily about the water. A lot of people think it's the water, but it's actually the capacity, the infrastructure that's needed to deal with that. And the question what we need to ask ourselves is, what kind of fire would occur, what do we think a fire that would occur in our service area in Alameda County Water District, and what's the proper duration to be able to deal with that fire? So we'll work with engineering staff to determine that. We also have some ideas about that too, of course. Then once we know, well, what's this duration of fire that we're gonna have, that we're designed for to deal with, and that we can deal with, then the next question is how much do we allocate that between public, which are the hydrants, and to the private, which are the individuals that have fire sprinkler systems like this. And so there's visuals now. I want to get into the little visuals here. So the terminology we have is what we call max day, max hour demand. So this is average ADD. I'm sorry, I should have defined that as average daily demand. So that's that base demand that occurs just normal throughout the year. Then you have this additional max day capacity, and this is a distribution system, you know, a pipe. And then you have this additional capacity for fire. And that's what we're trying to ask ourselves. How much of the capacity, how much of the system is to deal with fire? The second one is a storage tank here. Again, average daily demand. You have this max day, and then you have this additional capacity. And so we're gonna look at a fire duration and determine these costs. So we'll, as I mentioned earlier, we'll work with staff to determine the duration of the fire. Should we look at multiple fires occurring in our service area? You know, what's appropriate? What's the system designed for? We'll work with staff. We have professional judgments in this area and to determine that. And so once we determine that, then we can allocate that cost between the public, those are the hydrants, and to the private fire, and then an associated rates for fire lines. Is there any questions that you may have about this area?
Questions or comments from the board?
A quick comment.
Director?
Question. When we talk about private fire lines, what we have on a requirement now for a number of single family residents is that they have a system which is attached to both the residential meter, not a separate fire line. Is that part of your calculation to take into account those units where we're putting in a larger meter to be able to handle both the fire flows for a limited number of sprinklers in the homes?
So the board has made action on that policy associated with residential in the past. I suspect we will revisit, we'll look at that, but I don't think we need to change that aspect of the residential. This is more about the dedicated specific meters that are only for fire. So these are really the commercial multifamily establishments.
Okay.
Any other directors that have questions or comments? If not, does any members of the public have questions or comments for the board or Mr. Gar? If you wish to do so, if you have questions or comments, please speak up or raise your hand. I am not seeing or hearing any. Mr. Gar, next steps?
Yeah, next steps. Our next step is to conduct this cost of service analysis, basically to determine what's appropriate private fire lines are. It's also good to update the cost of service done, as mentioned, 5 years ago. We also want to receive your input. I know the second part of this presentation that staff will do will be the financial nature, and so we'll be talking a little bit about that. And then the last thing, of course, is to develop this administrative record, to have that document fresh and available and updated to the new standards. It's an interesting industry. It's changing and evolving, and we want to make sure we keep up to with the times.
And I'll just add to that we won't know for sure until we do the study, but we actually think that the rates for these dedicated fire service lines might actually go down a little bit. And so if this is the only direction we get this evening is to go and look specifically at these rates, it may not require a full Prop 218 process because we wouldn't actually be increasing any rates. But again, we would need to complete the study to know the answer to that for sure.
John Weed, one more. In the city of the fire sprinkler regulations continue to expand. And I have a building which some of the uses would require that I go to a sprinkled building. Predates the incorporation of the city, about $100,000 expenditure. But if that has to be done, and if you know that in much of your community you have existing buildings which are not sprinkled, but if built currently would have to be sprinkled, would that be part of your calculation, or would you assume that they would? Since you're looking at future capacity needs, and fire flow really determines the size of your pipes, have we not taken that into account already?
So we're going to look at a fire duration to determine the capacity that's needed for fire. So the fire duration, the type of fire that we need to be able to handle as a district, is going to be the determination of the cost, so the capacity that's needed for fire.
And you would also then take into account the experience of other communities when they have a seismic event and the number of fires that occur. And I would note that if one doesn't have seismic insurance, fire insurance is available, and the number of fires seems to be increased dramatically.
Any other questions or comments from the board? If not, I say we move on.
All right, thank you, President Wong, members of the board. We're now prepared to transition back to the staff portion of this evening's presentation. And we'll now go through a number of scenarios in the financial planning model. We'll also provide updates on to the financial plan since we last talked to the board on this. When we come at budget time, there's a certain amount of estimating involved in the numbers for the current fiscal year. And so we now have actual results for the fiscal year and updates to the model based on that. There have also been some comments this evening about COVID-19 and perhaps the economic conditions. So we have tried to prepare some indicators that may be of value to the board, and so that those can be part of the discussion. And so with that, I will turn the time over to Sydney Aum, our supervising financial analyst, who will walk us through this portion of the presentation.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Wonderlich. Good evening, Madam President and members of the board, members of the public. My name is Sydney Aum. I'm the supervising financial analyst for the district. So as Mr. Wonderlich mentioned, there are some key changes to our financial planning model, the model that we use to build our budget since the board adopted the budget in June. I'll go over briefly the key changes, one of which is the good news for us. The district received $1 million in payment from Oliver Day Silva for Fish Passage projects in Illinois Creek. Staff also looked at our medical cost assumption when we did the budget. We like Mr. Wonderlich said, we did a lot of estimate. After that, we got some new information. CalPERS sent us some premium information. Looking at that and looking at how we capped the medical cost premium for employees at the 2017 levels, we went ahead and adjusted our estimate for over the next few years. So another changes was the actuals. Again, the fiscal year 1920, when we did the budget, we estimated that we would end the year at a certain level. Now that our year end closed, we have the actuals, revenues, and expenses. So looking at that, or fiscal year end for fiscal year 1920, the general fund ending cash balance ended up at approximately $6 million higher than the estimate at budget adoption. Most significantly, our meter replacement program, staff estimate that with the meter replacement program, with the higher accuracy in reading, that will provide a revenue increase, which we estimate similar to a 3% rate adjustment. So this is looking at our key metric, is the general fund ending balances, what we looked at primarily to look at the financial state of the district. When the board adopted the budget, we're looking at the low year. The low balance at budget adoption was at $78.8 million. That was in fiscal year 23-24 estimate. And now when we updated our financial planning model with the actual activity for fiscal year 19-20, the low balance had increased due to the key changes that I mentioned earlier to $89.4 million in the same fiscal year. This is looking at our debt coverage ratios. Since the district does not have a lot of debt, we have a very healthy debt coverage ratios as shown on the graph here. Again, updated for the actual activity, the debt coverage ratio jumped up a little bit in the fiscal year 19-20 to over 900%. So I mentioned the district maintained extremely strong rating. We're a AAA rated district by S&P and AA1 by Moody's. This is looking at the district's annual operating revenue. Wanted to look at to see if this we get enough operating revenue to cover the district operating expenses. These metrics indicate that the district does receive sufficient revenue to cover the operating expenses plus the depreciation, which is average about $14 million annually. This is another metric the board is familiar with, looking at our rate revenue. This is revenues coming from the water rates, and then looking that compared to the revenue requirement, which is primarily our O&M. Looking at this, the chart shows that the district receive enough revenue to pay for the operating and maintenance expenses. However, when we added capital program for the general fund, the district relies on, as Director Sethi mentioned earlier, the non-water revenues. So other revenue sources to supplement that, and those sources come from like the property tax is a big one. This is just a brief look at our capital improvement program. Just wanted to indicate that the year-end actuals ended up about $2 million higher than we estimated at budget adoption.
And I'll just throw in briefly here that this has also been amended to include the change order that's been approved for the AMI project.
Thank you, Mr. Wonderlich. Speaking of the change order, we'll cover that here too. So this is the status quo. So what I've just shown, status quo, that's maintain the reserve above the target, or status quo is going to be used to compare in the slide going forward. I'll show that in a little bit. So here are some of the key assumptions for the status quo. Our financial planning model is assumed 3% annual rate increase. There's no decline in commercial water consumption built in due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The current CIP is maintained at the level the board adopted, and it includes the change order at $3.4 million that the board approved for our AMI program, and the planned water supply investment. We did an estimate, and that's included what we planned at that point. It also includes the projected pension and OPEB funding based on a 6.5% discount rate. It's a level dollar, same payment every year, with the full funding by fiscal year 2032. That's June 30th, 2032. The status quo includes an assumption that we would finance our AMI project with the $14.5 million in financing. And it also, this is a key one as well, as I mentioned earlier, this is include a revised bill demand from a flat 34 MGD, million gallon per day, to 35.15 million gallon per day in 3 years' time.
Sydney, Sydney, Director Sethi here. What is the status right now on the application for the $14.5 million from the state revolving fund for AMI?
Unfortunately, I don't know the status of that. I'm wondering if either John or Mr. Stevenson can chime in on that.
Yeah, it's a kind of a lengthy administrative process with the state. I know we've submitted an initial application, and I believe may have been assigned a kind of a project manager at the state. But it's something that will take a while to get through that process. Mr. Stevenson, any additional updates that you're aware of?
No, I think you've got it right, John. We've done our initial submissions and we're in the process of submitting a number of technical submissions in addition to what has been submitted in the past. And we do have a grant administrator with the state that we're working with. So we're in process.
What would be your expectation of the timeline here to find out about funding? Is it 3 months, 6 months, a year?
I would be thinking on the order of 6 months, but I'd have to check in with the team to get closer than that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. This is looking at, again, our general fund ending balances for the status quo. The low balance is at $89.4 million in fiscal year 2024. Again, this is the metric that we'll use as comparison. One of our scenarios that we want to show is the potential COVID-19 revenue adjustment impact. Staff estimate that there could be a potential impact to our commercial water use. So one of the assumption is looking at a 20% decline in the commercial water use for over the next 2 fiscal years. The other assumption we wanted to show is foregoing the rate increase that's effective March 1, 2021. A third scenario pertaining to the COVID-19 impact is looking at both the decline in water use for the commercial user and foregoing the rate increase. So this is looking at the 20% decline in our water consumption for the commercial customer. Compare that to the status quo with the 20% decline in the commercial water consumption for the 2 years. There's a cumulative loss of revenue of $5.8 million estimate. So the low balance is drop of about $5.7 million compared to our status quo.
A quick question on that last slide. We are now into this for 5 months. Is there any evidence that this has in fact taken place? That we've seen a decline in commercial water consumption?
So we definitely saw a decline in commercial consumption the first few months. And the last couple of months, we've been kind of back to seasonal norms, but it looks like most of that is because of higher than usual outdoor water use by commercial customers. So if you still look strictly at the indoor water use, there still is a decline. And so, the concern is, next summer might not be as hot and dry as this summer. We might not make it up with increased outdoor use. And so we do think it's, there is still some risk of lower commercial water use. You will see, though, compared to the budget workshop, we have eliminated the scenario of a reduction in development activity because development activity has continued to be very high. And at this stage, we are not anticipating any reductions there.
Okay, so you'll have an opportunity to true this up as we get closer to the actual adoption of the budget.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, this scenario is looking at assume foregoing the rate increase that's effective March 1, 2021, that's built into the model. The low balance for this scenario is $76.6 million compared to the status quo of 89.4. That's a drop of 12.6 million. Still 11.6 million above the red line in that fiscal year, which is the reserve target. Just the district can weather this scenario. This is looking at a combination of the decline in the commercial consumption and foregoing the rate increase. The low balance is 18.4 million below the status quo. That's 71 million versus 89.4. Again, the balance looking out through fiscal year 25-26 remain above the reserve target with a combination of the two scenarios. Another scenario we want to look at is the N3 related to the N3 ranch. We have three scenarios we wanted to show. One is the outright purchase at the listing price of 68 million. This require issuing bond to fund that. In addition, there's $2 million in annual operating and maintenance expenses associated with that. With that scenario, it is assumed that the AMI project that we talked about earlier would be fully funded by the SRF loan at 39.5. That's the total project cost, not just half of it. The other scenario is a $5 million cash contribution towards a partnership purchase, plus $1 million in annual O&M expenses. The third scenario we looked at was a full outright purchase with the O&M costs, plus the commercial revenue decline I described earlier, 20% reduction, and then foregoing a rate increase for fiscal year 2021. Again, wanted to note that the amounts here are just for illustrative purposes only for our analysis. The final purchase price or contribution amount will be subject to negotiation. So with the purchase, the listing price and the $2 million annual O&M, the low balance is at $87 million. That's $2.4 million lower than the status quo. This is assuming that the district would issue a bond at a true interest cost of 2.92%, and our debt, annual debt service would be approximately $3.4 million. With the purchase, our debt coverage ratios would drop from the peak of 904% as of fiscal year 19-20 to 325% by fiscal year 25-26. This scenario look at the partnership, the $5 million contribution and the $1 million in annual O&M. So the low balance is approximately $9.1 million below the status quo. It would still be about 14 million above the target. This is looking the three scenarios combined. The purchase, outright purchase, decline in commercial water consumption and foregoing the rate increase for fiscal year 2021. The low balance here would occur in fiscal year 24-25. At $64.3 million. That is $2 million below the reserve target.
Sydney, I do have a quick question. So when you say N3 ranch purchase, this is the 68 million?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. With that scenario, our debt coverage ratio would drop further from 904% to 299% by fiscal year 25-26. Okay, this scenario looks at our potential changes to how we fund our pension and OPEB. Currently, the status quo to the right assumes a 6.5% discount rate. That's the only thing that would change. We were looking at a 6% discount rate due to the market condition that we looked at during the budget workshop. We were directed to look at 6%. With the 6% discount rate, again, just looking at the low balance, would be at $78.7 million in fiscal year 23-24. That's approximately 10.7 million a drop compared to our status quo. So that's again with the 6% discount rate, level dollar, full funding, June 30th, 2032. As Mr. Wonderlich indicated earlier, we wanted to show some of the key metrics, the economic indicators just to see the impact to the district. This is looking at our unemployment, the nation's unemployment, California, and the county, consumers price index for the US and for our area, gross domestic product, and as well as looking at the district specific, looking at our water production changes, and the residential, commercial, industrial water consumption, and as well as looking at our past due balances. There's a couple of numbers that jumped out there. The GDP for the fourth quarter is an example, a 32.9% reduction. That's dramatic. And then I'm not going to go over the numbers specifically, just to give you a general idea where we're at as far as the economy is concerned. With our past due balances, notice it went up from an average prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. The district averaged around $300,000 in past due balances. Looking at the past 12 months, we're averaging at around $500,000. So currently, not currently, but as of the June and July number, we're at about $1 million. Okay, this is looking at that past due balances trend. Just going to give a visual. As I said earlier, that it's trending up. Looking at this, we noticed that it flattened out a little bit in June and July. So the district sent out a bill of about approximately $50 million in billing over the past 5 months. So our past due balance is approximately 2% of that billing. And I would like to turn it back over to Mr. Wonderly for this part.
All right, so I guess at this point, you know, we've been through a number of scenarios, and you know, I would just ask if there's any questions from the board about the scenarios or any feedback regarding what's been presented.
John Weed, if I could. We note the using elimination of the positive displacement meters and replacing them with solid state meters. But that money will not be seen for at least, it'll take 3 years to install the new meters. So that's 3 years down the road. And we've allocated that against the cost of the project, showing about a 3-year payback for making the change and taking on the additional cost. So I would suggest that that element of your considerations be put off for about 6 or 7 years. Then it comes into play. That the next, that with a 350% markup on our commodity, that the cost of conservation, for every dollar we spend on conservation, we lose several dollars in revenue. And since we've increased and enhanced our conservation efforts, that should be one of the elements we look at in our budgeting, because as we promote conservation, we lose money, a lot of money.
Thank you, Director Weed. Other directors? Thoughts on staff recommendations, questions?
Director Sethi here.
Director Sethi?
I support the staff recommendation on updating the cost of service analysis. The second bullet, I support. On the third one, I think it's too premature to factor in what we might think are any inherent increases in revenue from AMI. I think we're going to have at least 3 or 4 years of data or some significant contribution to revenue where we recognize that, you know, perhaps a lower rate adjustment is required. So I would not be in favor at this point in terms of foregoing a rate increase of 3%.
Right. Any other directors?
Director Gunther here. I'm kind of inclined to go along with Director Sethi's comments. I guess my question is, and I haven't lost track, it gets a little confusing when we do 2 years. This rate increase I just want to confirm that this is going to require a 218 notice, correct?
So if all we do is the updated cost of service analysis and a look at the dedicated fire line rates, I do not think it will require a 218 because I expect those dedicated fire line rates to actually go down a little. And when a rate goes down, you don't need to go through that process. Now, certainly if we looked at at just a general rate increase, then yes, of course, we would need to do a 218 process.
Okay, so if we don't take into account the considerations on what we might find with the new meters, and I do agree, I think that's going to be a couple of years out. I'm kind of looking at, I think we should probably stay where we are going, maybe drop it to 2% versus 3%. Any additional costs that I see that we would get from that would be, certainly we can move it into our unfunded liabilities. I think that's kind of how I'm looking at this. I'm concerned, Director Weed's point about that 0% before we did the 20 and 5. He's correct that we did that. And I don't think it was necessarily a bad idea. The only problem was when over the multiplications were never taken over a 3-year period. They were done in a 2-year period in the public eye and versus a 3-year period. So I think there should be a lesson there in that we still could use this money if we stay where we're going to pay down that unfunded mandate. If the item 3 actually takes place, then if it doesn't, then we're covered. But if it does, then any additional funding at this point in time can be used towards that. Do we know what and I know we haven't talked about it yet. What has our CPI, or I think it's CPI, been running at?
So looks like CPI for this area, the annual CPI in February was 2.9%, but because of the effects of the pandemic, in April it dropped to 1.1.
1.5.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 3 is a little higher than CPI. Okay.
Yeah, the other thing I would just add regarding the meter replacements and the enhanced accuracy, certainly the way staff has modeled that is based on the schedule in which they're replaced. So we're not assuming that all comes in right now. It's phased in over several years. Mm-hmm. But from kind of a long-term perspective, we're viewing it as a similar revenue adjustment to a rate increase. And it's been, it's been about 6 years since we've had a proactive meter replacement program. And so even if there's, I'll just acknowledge that the estimates of what an ultrasonic meter might do are, they're just that, they're estimates. There are some limited studies that we've tried to base those estimates on. But given the number of years it's been since we've done proactive meter replacements, we do feel pretty confident that we will see at least some adjustment there.
Director Gunther?
I hope we will. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, if I might just add to what you're saying here, I like the idea that you're presenting that if there's any excess revenue based on our 3% 218 over the next 2 years, we can certainly use it to pay unfunded liabilities in an accelerated way. And then I would also offer this information that the Fed chairman and the Fed board today, early in the morning, announced that they would be changing their philosophy from a 2% target inflation rate to at least 2% to encourage full employment, and that the Bay Area statistics were closer to a 3% target for your urban areas on the East and West Coast and some other metropolitan areas. So I I think once we get through the COVID-19 thing, you're probably looking, long-term at 3%, which is matching our 10-year dashboard right now of 3% annual rate increases. And if we need to make some lower adjustments along the way, I'm open-minded to that. We're going to reevaluate this anyway, back in November or December.
Yeah, if I may, Madam President, just to provide some context. One of the purposes of bringing this presentation to the board today was to sort of get a handle on whether the board would be comfortable, maybe foregoing a rate increase because other agencies are doing that. It would be good for us to know if that was the case, because then that determines whether or not we need another workshop in the November, December timeframe. We're not asking the board to make a decision on a rate increase or a proposed rate increase or the magnitude of a rate increase today. But if we received a strong sense that the board's overall desire is to forego one, this is up to the board, given the current sort of pandemic situation, then that would help us in planning for the next year or so and the workshops that we would want to work with the board during that period of time. So if the answer is the board doesn't know, then we know as staff that we'll schedule a rates workshop to get into more details, and that's totally fine.
Mr. Shaver, I think that it would be very helpful to the board because we only hear anecdotally what other boards are thinking about or doing, but maybe if the finance staff could come back and give us some representative water districts and what they're doing, whether it's keeping rates flat or providing some kind of discount. I don't feel like we have the full set of data here to make a decision.
Yeah, understood. And we certainly will provide that information to the board. The only agency that I'm aware of that actually has done a rate increase was USD. Most of the water agencies that I'm familiar with are not doing that for this cycle. But we will get that data and share it with the board to help you in your decision-making process.
Yeah, I actually kind of know the answer to that for some of the bigger agencies in the region. So I can tell you that East Bay Mud proceeded with their planned rate increase earlier this summer. It was the second year of a 2-year Prop 218 process for them, and they went ahead and implemented as scheduled. SFPUC also implemented their rate increases scheduled. Again, they did not initiate a 218 process, but they implemented a previous approved increase on a multi-year 218. Zone 7 had an increase approved from a previous 218 and has elected not to implement it. So I know that's where Zone 7 is at. And Valley Water, I know, was looking at an increase and then decided not to move forward, although they're doing periodic reevaluation. So they haven't necessarily decided permanently to forgo an increase this year, but as of yet, the current decision is not to implement an increase.
Director Gunther, again, I did a quick calc, hopefully I'm right. 3%, $100 bill. What was that come out to? It's not that high. I want to say
$3 more.
Yeah, I was right. Okay, $3 every 2 months. We've already determined that we're, going to very closely see what we can do with our Help on Tap program to help the people that are in trouble. We've already identified that we're trying to help the people that are in trouble due to COVID are going to be able to be helped on tap. I say we keep going the course, 2-3%, somewhere in there. We could adjust, like you said, but to say we're going to forego, I don't know. I think we could keep pushing ahead. It's not that much. We're not talking a significant. We're not talking 20. We're not talking 5%. We're talking 2-3%, I think, here. And I'd like to stay at that and keep moving ahead. at that percent. We're not, I mean, what was it? Union Sand did 5 year at how much? I mean,
8% a year.
yeah, it was like 8%. Well, I won't comment on that, but it was, yeah, 5 years at 8%. Now they have their justifications. They did. I think, like I said, any excess monies we would draw certainly could go towards our unfunded mandate, which is a bonus. That just helps us. And I think for the extra $1.50 a month, like I said, for the residents who we know are having trouble, we're already trying to work with them. And I think $1.50 a month, we probably could do something. That's where I'm at.
Well, you know, we just had the results from the finance staff. We've got about, I think it was in the in the Aqueduct newsletter, we've got about 800 people on the Help on Tap program. That's about 1% of our residential customers, or a little bit more than that. And we keep broadening the program, but the number of people that are subscribing is flattening out on the curve right now. It'd be nice if we could expand it to double that number, but there seems to be some threshold cutoff in our community. We're one of the wealthiest communities in the Bay Area country, and so there aren't that many people when you look at the what's below $60,000 of household income in our community.
Yeah, I won't disagree with that. I think a large portion of our community can afford to pay it. There's a portion that can't, and I think we're certainly looking towards them. I am concerned that COVID has still got us in our grip. As one could see if they look at the video, my barber's, last I checked, still not open. So I don't know if he's gonna make it. And I'm hoping, restaurants and stuff, it's still kind of precarious out there, and this could take but once again, if it does take that dive, I think we're gonna know in a couple months. And even after that, we could always do something else. If we decide to, I'd say we go ahead, continue to press along where we are with an understanding that we're looking at it. We're monitoring it. We're looking at our Help on Tap, and we're looking at what's happening. But I'd say we continue to press ahead where we're at.
Thank you, Director.
Sorry, if I may. In regard to Help on Tap, the latest update I got had us in the just shy of 1,000. It was 990 something. And as I look at the inbox, which I can see from my office of our program administrator, I see a few envelopes in there. So we may be just about to cross the 1,000 threshold. And typically what we see is a lot of the folks on the program are seniors on a fixed income, people who already own their home. Because if you're paying a full rent or mortgage payment for something that you bought recently in our community, then you're probably not somebody whose income is below these limits.
John, we follow up on, it was $125,000 for Help on Tap out of $112 million water revenues last year. It's going to be more this coming year. So, it's not a significant factor from a large financial standpoint. Next, if we are going to do a 3% rate increase, which I have no objection to, I would ask that we go back and look, and assuming that it will be 95% of that will be to cover the cost of increased service charges and 5% for commodities, that we ask that the rate increase be allocated to meet the charges by category. That would be a wonderful change in policy.
Director Gunther here. I don't support that. Just let you know, I feel we've hit a good spot. I think if we continue to progress the way we do, we're going to be fine. That's how I feel, and I've seen that, and I've looked at your numbers. I've heard it. I've heard it in almost every meeting we've had in the last 2 years. So I'm happy where we're at. I'm saying my piece right now because this is where it needs to be said. And so I say 3%, and we do it across the board.
I
I have no
will,
pers-
I,
Let me bring us back on track. So
I will,
Okay, let me quickly respond to that.
I will
We're not
reiterate my,
addressing, we're
hold on,
readdressing.
John, hold
I'm
on.
asking to hold the status quo.
I will reiterate my position along the lines of Director Gunther. I keep saying we are really in a sweet spot right now. Let's just stay where we are.
And that's what I'm asking us to do by allocating them against the current increases per ratio.
let me
And that would keep us in the same sweet spot.
staff to bring the slide back to the recommendation slide. Okay, this is where we're going to focus our discussion. I heard from Director Gunther and Director Safi. It seems like both directors are okay with all three recommendations, correct?
I was saying number
no,
three,
no.
we
No, you're,
stay with the
neither of you
3%.
is okay with AMI. Never mind.
Not foregoing a rate increase.
Right.
Yeah, with continuing to look at a 3%
Okay, so you're
across the
okay.
board.
Both of you are okay with cost of service analysis. You are okay with maintaining a current fixed variable allocation. However, you would like to consider you will support a 3% rate increase.
Correct.
And I would note, if I might, that we have remarkable control over our revenues by merely adjusting the information package we give people on whether they should use or not use water. So if we run into a shortfall, you cut back on your conservation program and you get a 3-for-1 return. So it's a way to greatly boost your revenues. Or if you want to decrease your revenues, you increase your conservation. And you get a 3-for-1 to the negative.
Thank you for your comments. So in terms of the staff recommendation, I assume you are in support of cost of service analysis, but you are not supporting maintaining the current fixed variable allocations. And I am assuming you're okay with the 3% rate increase. I wasn't quite clear because you actually tied your concurrence with the 3% increase to the fixed and variable allocations. So can you clarify your position?
This is John Weedy speaking with me. The point I'm making is that if you're going to maintain the current fixed variable allocation, you should allocate the new rate increase to reflect where that money is being spent. If 95% of the new 3% is going to fixed cost, then 95% should be allocated to fixed cost.
Okay.
And the 5% to the variable. That would be my point.
Thank you, Director Weed. Director Akbari, do you have any questions or comment, or what do you think of staff recommendations?
So I can actually get behind all 3 points in the staff recommendation, including looking at foregoing a rate increase for this fiscal year or next fiscal year. Though I think Directors Gunther and Sethi did make an interesting argument on, as I understood it, using the additional revenue that we would generate from the increase to help our advance payments for OPEB and our unfunded liabilities. I can actually see a reasonable argument there because, long term that would save our ratepayers a considerable amount of money. I might be able to support a rate increase if we're more in line with the local CPI, so something in the range of 1.5%. I can actually get behind that, just simply because the long-term benefits for our ratepayers are definitely there. So I hope that gives you kind of enough clarification on where I stand. I'm going to look for staff to give me a yes or no.
Yeah, I think that's clear now.
Okay.
I know that President Wong hasn't expressed her thoughts yet, but I think what staff is hearing is enough to know that we will be back with a rate workshop to work out the issues with the board. Again, we're not asking for any decisions on rates this evening. And, the conditions are variable. So I think we got the input we need, but I also know that your board president probably wants to express herself.
Actually, and our customers should have a chance to express themselves too. I actually would say that I am fine with update the cost of service analysis and maintaining the current fixed and variable allocations. I actually am very tempted in foregoing a rate increase. However, understanding that the income uncertainties due to COVID, that actually gave me pause. I know it's a balance game on affordability versus financial stability for us, but I am definitely persuaded by the comments from Director Sethi and Gunther that if we collect extra money, we should dedicate the extra money to pay off our unfunded liability because there is long-term saving for the district and our customers. I also agree with Director Akbari that we should not be wedded to the 3%. It should be 3% or local CPI, whichever is lower. That would definitely be my preference. But I know we'll have to hash this out at the next workshop. So with that, to keep things moving, I would say if any members of the public that has questions, comment, or wish to address the board at this time, please raise your hand or speak up. And I see we may have a hand from Mr. Nishimura. He popped up and disappeared. Mr. Nishimura, do you wish to address the board?
Yes, sorry. Took me a bit to unmute. Again, I haven't been able to follow this meeting in the detail that I normally do due to conflicting obligations. So I thought that maybe I will chime in on one other aspect, which is in the rate structure. And I have a follow-on question for Mr. Wunderlich. My comment is ACWD is unusual in the fact that it has a plurality of sources of water to provide its customers. In addition, the cost to procure said water varies wildly depending on the source. Based on tables 4-5 and 4-6 in your 2018 water rate update study, there is effectively a 10-to-1 difference between the lowest cost water and the most costly sources of water. As such, in light of Capistrano Taxpayers Association v. Capistrano and Palmdale v. Palmdale, there exists a solid foundation for ACWD to quote unquote show our work, unquote, to justify tiered rates where the benefits of our lowest cost water be allocated equal to each customer, with customers using more water bearing their proportional share of the cost of procuring the more costly water required. I have a question, and if I understand, this is a workshop, so I'm allowed to perhaps ask a question of Mr. Wunderlich. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Nishimura, you may ask the question.
Yes. So some discussion has ensued about the benefits of funding, using excess revenues or additional revenues to extinguish the OPEB liability. Do you know what the internal rate of return for that is?
Well, our discount rate that we use in funding those benefits is 6.5%. And so certainly from a long-term perspective, if you assume that we would earn 6.5% every year, there could be a lot of value in getting that paid down. Of course, there's a certain amount of risk associated with those payments as well, because once you give the money to the trust fund or to CalPERS, you can't take it back, right? Sure,
it's like prepaying a mortgage.
Yeah, like imagine that you had a 6.5% interest rate on your mortgage, which 15 years ago might have been normal, even though nobody pays that anymore. Exactly.
Right. So I guess my question then, my follow-on question is, are there opportunities for us to quote unquote refi that 6.5% liability? Director Sethi has pointed out on numerous occasions that one can borrow money for far less than that today.
Yes, that's one of the thoughts that has already been going through my mind that we might discuss the pros and cons of with the board at this next workshop. And essentially what you're referring to is potentially issuing what I might call an indirect pension obligation bond, where we would introduce debt financing to our capital program and use the cash that frees up, because we're currently planning PAYGO for our capital program, to accelerate the pay down of those liabilities. And
Correct. Yes.
from a strict mathematical perspective, I will say that that makes a lot of sense from a strict mathematical perspective, but there's also a certain amount of risk that you take on because you're assuming that you will consistently have positive returns in those benefit trust funds. You also lower your borrowing capacity for the district should other needs arise after you take out those bonds, and you're lowering your debt coverage. Now, certainly we're in a position as a district where we have a very strong debt coverage ratio and a very strong debt capacity. So certainly as I've heard this discussion today, you know, depending on the potential pros and cons of that, you know, we would evaluate a lot of different scenarios as staff and try to bring a range of options to the board in October when the next workshop is scheduled to occur. You know, I'll just say as a finance director, I'm somewhat hesitant to outright recommend that type of strategy because it does come with some risk, but certainly from a mathematical perspective, it could pencil out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Malik. Director Wee?
Yes, thank you. A request for the next workshop, and it's something that came out of our last finance committee meeting. The highest returns on investments have been on the most conservative investments. And our ongoing funds are down, drawing an almost nominal interest right now. And yet we can show, because we, ironically, with this huge drop in interest rates, we have about a $7 million in unrealized profit from those investments. We're carrying about twice the amount of money as our benchmark in those cash reserves. The suggestion is that we sell half the cash reserves, pocket several $million in profit, and put that profit into the OPEB funds, which are drawing hopefully in the I'm encouraging the 6% become the new standard.
Thank you, Director Weed. And I will say we'll put that the creative idea as your agenda item request for the next financial workshop, and let's get back to this particular workshop's topic. Do I have any other members of the public wish to address the board or have questions for board staff? If you wish to do so, please raise your hand or speak up. Seeing or hearing none, I think all the directors provided our thoughts, and I am assuming based on what Mr. Shaver says, staff has enough directions from the board to proceed.
I believe so. I will double check with Mr. Wunderlich.
I believe so. You know, what we heard this evening is that there is perhaps not significant interest on the board to relook at the allocations between fixed and variable, but that there is interest in updates to the cost of service analysis and looking at the dedicated fire service lines, as well as interest in further considerations of potential rate adjustments. And so in terms of next steps, based on the feedback that's been provided this evening, we do have on the annual board calendar a financial workshop date of October 22nd. And so staff will get busy analyzing different potential scenarios related to these different topics we've discussed to present a range of options to the board October 22nd. And I don't know if we will be ready to talk about dedicated fire service lines yet at that point, but certainly we'll be prepared to present a range of options related to rate increases, related to capital program financing, related to paying for our unfunded liabilities, which were, I think, some of the topics I heard mentioned this evening, and how those might interrelate and what an appropriate rate adjustment could be.
All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments on this item? If not, I think this is the end of this particular item, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So I am not seeing or hearing any, so shall we move on to the next agenda item? which is, oh, before we do that, I would like to say thank you to staff. Thank you for the presentations. They're great presentations. And thank you for answering all our questions and anticipated all our questions. Great job. Thank you. So with that, let's move on to next agenda item, which is General Manager's report.
Yes, we have 3 quick items for you. The first one is I'd like to ask our Manager of Operations and Maintenance, Kurt Ahrens, to just give a brief report on the impacts of the fire to district operations.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver, members of the board. Just a quick update. As you know, California's been battling hundreds of wildfires that started with the lightning storms. Just a couple of interesting facts. I think since August 15th, there's been about 14,000 lightning strikes and 700 fires started in the state. The closest one to our service area, as you know, is the SCU complex fire, which is just over the hill. We had evacuation warning issued on the 22nd on Saturday. On the weekend, we also began having daily briefings with Department of Water Resources and our fellow SBA contractors to coordinate operations and potential impacts to our facilities, as far as water deliveries and potentially having to shut down treatment plants. So we've been having daily briefings with those agencies. We've also had staff, thank you to engineering, at the CAL FIRE Incident Command Center in Pleasanton. So that provided us firsthand information of what the status was. Also allowed us to provide firsthand information back to CAL FIRE and other agencies on our critical infrastructure and provide any information that they needed so they could do their job better. Fortunately, we've moved forward and things seem to be improving. The evacuation warning was lifted Tuesday, which was a relief. We're hoping that those firefighting efforts will continue to improve. The weather's been very positive for the firefighters lately. A little more humidity and cooler temperatures. So they've been making much better progress. I think that fire is now at 35%. There have been some air quality issues that were threatening our operations as well, just as far as our field staff. Fortunately, as you see today, it's gotten much better. So we're hoping that will continue if the weather continues to blow in the right direction. So we're hoping that we're on the slow recovery. It's probably going to be several weeks or months before that fire is completely out. But we'll continue to monitor that situation. We did revise our operations a little bit at the beginning of the fire when we didn't know what the impacts would be, topping off our system and keeping our tanks full just in case there was a demand for water, especially up in the foothills. But fortunately, none of that came through and they were able to stop the fire on the other side of Mission Peak. So with that, I will answer any questions you might have. Otherwise, that's the status and we will keep you informed of any new developments.
Thank you. Any questions from directors? Hearing none, moving on.
Okay, we're going to stay in the operations and maintenance mode for a moment. Mr. Ahrens is going to give you a preview of an issue that we're going to be bringing to the board at the September 10th meeting.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Shaver. On August 5th, earlier this month, we got indications of a leak on Peralta Boulevard near Mallory. It wasn't a leak on the surface, it was actually water going into a communications vault. So it took a while to track it down, and through sounding equipment, we were able to locate a leak we thought was on an 18-inch main that was in Peralta Boulevard. So we excavated, hoping that we would find that leak. A large portion of that pipe as it crosses Peralta, which is a Caltrans roadway, is encased in the 24-inch encasement pipeline. So we were hoping it was on the outside. Unfortunately, when we excavated, we found the leak and water coming out of the encasement, indicating the leak was somewhere within the encased portion of pipe. It's also a very deep pipeline. So at that point, it exceeds our internal staff's ability to excavate and shore safely and make those repairs. In process of trying to stop the leak and isolate that portion of the pipeline, it impacted service to the local church and also the park and Shin Garden that's in that area. So we're able to jump services and provide an alternative source to provide domestic service to them. However, by isolating that leak, they do not have fire service at the church. So that's the current impact of shutting down that pipeline. as well as potentially it will restrict our ability to use the blender and push water south if we have to increase flows in that direction. So we want to move quick to make that repair. It's not something we can do internally. So we turned to engineering for support, and we're able to solicit assistance from some of the contractors that are currently under contract with the district. And we're able to work with, I'm gonna be sure I get the name right, Tykert Construction, who's been awarded the main renewal project on the Sousa Avenue and Concord Street project. They came out, we explained the scope of work and what was needed, and they were able to confirm that they could provide that work and give us a cost for that. So the current plan is to proceed and have them make that repair. The general manager has the authority to initially get that work done, and we're hoping to get that done this weekend if things go well. However, we'll be coming back to the board in 2 weeks at the September board meeting with a change order to that project to address the costs under that project. So Ed and his team aren't overly impacted by us having them do that work for the operations department. So I just want to give you a heads up on that. And again, we'll be coming back next week or in 2 weeks with an update and change order for that project.
Quick question, John Weed.
Yes.
Did the loss of fire service result in our hiring fire watch for that facility for security?
They are available, yes. I think the project engineer, I think, actually called our security services to provide that service for them.
Well, I would encourage the board to revisit that policy. If you look at the definitions, it's somewhat archaic, given the fact that you have fire alarms in these buildings, and that concept was developed before the days of fire alarms. And then if you look at the modern definition, they talk about providing a fire watch where you have a facility that does not have a fire alarm.
Thank you, Director Weed.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, moving on. I say moving on.
Yeah. One last item. The district has received a request to support a grant application from for the Niles Canyon Trail from Supervisor Valle's office. So the district, as you recall, has supported the evaluation of a trail through Niles Canyon. So I'm inclined to go ahead and issue a support letter, but there was time to inform the board and let you know. And just as an aside, Supervisor Valle has requested to address the board in the October-November timeframe to provide an update on that particular project to the board. So I just kind of wanted to make sure the board was aware that we would be drafting a support letter. And I'm just looking at the little boxes on my screen to see if any board members are twitching, and I'm not seeing that. So I'll use that input accordingly.
I'm twitching with a question here, Mr. Bob.
Okay.
I'm twitching with a question. So what is the size of the grant?
It's $2 million for design-related costs.
And our contribution to date was something like 50,000 toward a 350,000?
Yes, the board authorized 50,000 in participation for the evaluation of the corridor.
Well, that sounds like a really good grant to go after, so I'm supportive in a preliminary way here.
Sure.
John Weed, did they cash our $50,000 check or and incorporate that in their planning?
I would have to get back to you on that.
My understanding is we were still waiting for them to accept the 50,000.
They have accepted it. The district has issued a check, but I don't know if that check has ever been cashed.
The next question, when we did this last time, we requested that as a condition that they maintain the integrity of the Niles Canyon Aqueduct. Is that still the policy and direction of the board? An understanding of the administration?
Well, the evaluation report includes several different alternatives, and I believe the Niles Aqueduct was considered in that evaluation report. But certainly being involved in the design process will give us a front row seat to kind of monitor and see what's being designed.
I would encourage us to reiterate that statement that we in policy we established earlier, that the integrity of the Niles Canyon Aqueduct will be included and incorporated in any design. That was one of the reasons we doubled the request from 25,000 to 50,000 and made that, in my mind, a condition. Thank you.
Any other comments from directors? Hearing none.
No, wait a minute. I thought you were finishing up on the general manager's report.
Yes, I was going to ask Bob if he has any other items.
That's it.
Okay. So that concludes Director Sethi. Do you have any questions regarding the general manager's report, or are you ready to move on to director's comment?
I'm ready to move on to item 7.
All right. So next is director's comments and or agenda item requests.
I have 2 very quick things.
Please.
Sanjay, while you're still here in the meeting, I should have done it earlier, but I wanted to thank you very much for your presentation. It never goes past me that I'm always learning something new from you. Every time you make a presentation, I learn something new or I have a better understanding. So thank you very much for your time. All right. And 2, I just wanted to let everyone know, on Tuesday we had a water efficient workshop from 7 to 8 o'clock. It actually went after that for a while, which I attended. It was on edible gardening techniques for your fall and winter gardens. And I must say it was one of the most enjoyable water efficient classes I've attended. It's recorded if you want to go back and view it. There were a lot of, I'm a regular summer and winter gardener growing a vegetable garden, but I learned a lot of interesting things I didn't know before. And Megan Marino did a fantastic job of coordinating the meeting and taking questions. And I believe, if I recall correctly, it was the first time we ever had over 100 people attend a water efficiency or water landscaping workshop. So it was terrific.
Thank you, Director Sethi. Director Wee, do you have any?
Give my compliments to Megan through Laura, who's here in our meeting, okay?
Will do. Thank you.
2 items to follow up, close on the earlier issue I mentioned on our item request for the sale of our near-term bonds, 3 to 5 years for our cash reserves. That is temporal, and it's playing the market. It's an opportunity that exists today, and hopefully will still be there in October. But if we don't take it, you lose it because as the bonds mature, that unrealized gain evaporates with the maturing of the bonds. We could still stay well within the amount of money we've identified under policy for cash reserves. Second, BOSCA report. BOSCA, as you recall, our board of requested that they go to a subscription service if BOSCA was to get involved in Los Vaqueros and funding. It was clear as during the discussions, it was really only the San Mateo County members that were in need of additional water supplies in that sense. And BOSCA, rather than taking that on, the subscription chose to not proceed, a BOSCA only effort. But now the staff wants to enthusiastically support San Francisco's involvement in Los Vaqueros, with the opportunity to sit at the table and be involved in the discussions. And once again, I would, my personal questions, and I'd like to get feedback from the others. With LV, there was no reason, LV1 and 2, we declined. LV3 has not seen, there's no change in our hydrology and storage requirements. The transfer line is important, that's new water, but the storage element itself is of suspect value to us. It does help bail out the Contra Costa ratepayers and help refund their expenditures they've done on an LV1 and 2. And I see that as being the sole benefit from the public benefit. There's money coming in. When I mentioned public benefit, I misspoke. That the bond issue, Prop 1, and some of the federal is for environmental monies, and they will use some of those to help reimburse their ratepayers. So it's something that's we're going to impact as a district, and we're going to have to discuss. And then we have to determine as to several intermediaries whether we want San Francisco to be involved as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Weed. Director Akbari, Director Gunther, do you have any comments or agenda item requests?
Not from my end.
Thank you,
Not
Director.
particularly from my end. I would like to thank the staff for yesterday's site visit to the fish ladder. It's pretty impressive.
Okay, thank you, Director Gunther. Nothing from me. I'm just going to say I'm sorry I missed the field trip yesterday. I had a conflict, darn it.
Well, you know what, Judy?
Mhm.
You know, I have been many times
We can go
watching the
back.
project on the north and the south side of the creek, but until you actually are in the creek bed,
Right.
you can't. It's just like when we were at the construction of Calaveras Dam. It gives you a whole new perspective on the size of the project. I mean, it's really mammoth. It's like the size of 3 football fields, and you feel like a little peon, you know, in front of all this equipment and the size of it. It's amazing.
I know. I had the privilege of visiting at part of committee meeting for our last fish ladder, right? And we actually got to go in and walked it. That was quite impressive. And this one is much bigger and much more complex. So that's my regret. So with that is, unless directors or staff have any other questions or comments, I am going to call the meeting adjourned.
Actually, President Huang, sorry. You mentioned, I also wasn't able to make it on the field trip yesterday, but I guess just thinking out loud, considering that both of us serve on the engineering and IT committee, maybe there's an opportunity for us to have a site visit through that committee. I'm looking at Ed, if that would be a possibility.
We're at your service. We would need to do some additional coordination and plan a time.
That would be great if we could go and discover the engineering aspect of the new fish ladder.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yay. So with that is 6:24. I'll call the meeting adjourned, and thank you everybody, and thank you staff, and thank you Mr. Gar for staying with us till the bitter end.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye.
good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Right.